Can you all see me or no?
Yep, I can see you, but it is very echoey for us online.
Hi, Dr. Reese.
All right, hello, how you doing?
Good, nice to have you. We're just
Good to
getting
be
rolling
here.
here. We'll be a couple minutes, okay?
Okay, real good,
Thank you.
Can you help me? So, I got to the link, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm
Good evening, everyone. My name is Patricia LaFour. I'm the Director of Human Rights and Accessibility for the City of Worcester. It's 6:02 p.m. We're here in the Esther Howland Chamber at City Hall. We also have members participating virtually, and also the public can obviously come here in person or participate virtually. This is the regular monthly meeting of the Human Rights Commission. We do have a quorum this evening. We have two local attorneys, one being a member of our Human Rights Commission, to make presentations. One is actually bilingual, English-Spanish available, and I will yield to the co-chair this evening. We have a planned absence from the chair, so I'll let Randy make a couple opening comments. First, I'm going to do a roll call of the members present. Vice Chair Randy Feldman.
present.
Clerk Carrie Witherell.
Present.
I'm sorry, could you just identify if you're in the chamber or virtual?
Yes, this is Carrie Witherell. I'm present virtual.
And Randy?
Present in the chamber.
Thank you. Member Robert Bellata? Member Bernard Reese?
Present virtual.
Thank you. Member Anahit Meridian?
Present virtually.
Thank you. Member Drew Schneblin? Member Reverend Jonathan Slavinskis,
Present virtual.
and Member Jacqueline Yang.
Here virtually.
Thank you so much. I yield back to the Vice Chair. Thank you.
Okay, hopefully everybody got a chance to read the minutes from the last meeting. So would there be a motion to accept last meeting's minutes?
Motion to
Make a
accept the
motion that we
minutes.
accept. Well, I
Any
second the motion.
Okay, there's our second. All right, Pat, you want to say all in favor? Is that you?
So we have a motion by Member Reverend Jonathan Slavinskis, seconded by Dr. Reese. Roll call of the members present, please. Vice Chair Randy Feldman,
Yay?
Clerk Carrie Witherell,
Aye.
Member Bernard Reese,
Aye.
Member Anahit Merudian,
Aye.
Member Reverend Jonathan Slavinskis,
Aye.
Member Jacqueline Yang.
Aye.
The motion carries.
I guess I meant aye, huh? Thanks. Okay, all right, but before we get to the housekeeping issues, Anahit, could you remind us about that wonderful event that you have coming up so we all can put it on our calendar?
Of course. Thank you for reminding me. So we're organizing a film screening at Clark University Strassler Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies. The movie is called My Sweet Land. It's on November 3rd, 6 p.m. So there's a regional conflict that was happening in Nagorno-Karabakh region in Armenia. So the movie kind of talks about a young boy's 11-year-old Rez's perspective on how the conflict was occurring. So the movie is essentially a way of raising awareness and kind of educating about this conflict. So we'd love to see you there if you can make it.
Okay, and again, November 3rd at Clark University, 6 p.m. in the Higgins Lounge.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so housekeeping. I don't know if people recognize this, but since our last meeting, the Research Bureau put out an incredibly in-depth study entitled Overdue for Civilian Oversight, and it's about whether Worcester should have a police oversight entity. It was put out in October 2025, and I think it's a report, Pat, I'm going to ask if you could forward that to all the members for the next meeting to make sure that everybody has read it, because I'm sure when Guillermo comes back and we get a chance to meet with Kevin, he would also want this to be put on the agenda for our next monthly meeting, and I want to make sure everybody has a chance to read this because it's a incredibly insightful work. Very comprehensive, and everybody will learn an awful lot reading it. It is extensive, so leave yourself some time to read it, please. So let's put that on so that everyone can get that for next month, and we'll formally put it on the agenda, I'm sure. The other thing I wanted to bring up is that, Kevin, you were nice enough when you took the position a year ago to tell us that the city manager was going to give us a redacted version of the police reports so we could better understand what is being accomplished by the current system and what, if anything, is amiss in the current system. And we've been waiting for that report, the redacted police reports, for about 1 year now, and we haven't received them. And then I was able to read in a local paper, online paper by Tom Marino, that a woman was asking for her records from the Worcester Police Department through the City Law Department, and that a spokesperson for City Manager Eric Batista's office said, "I'm told the records will be provided shortly." So if this person is able to get them shortly, and we've waited a year and haven't got them yet, I certainly think that would be something that Guillermo, as our chair, probably would also want to be put on the agenda for next meeting, and I hope that you can look into that and see how that's going. Okay, all right, now getting to the business at hand. We're extremely fortunate to have Alex Meridian with us. He's a great immigration lawyer here in the city of Worcester, bilingual has helped a tremendous amount of people in his career, and he has agreed to give a presentation, a further presentation. We had one by Susan Church already, and he's agreed to push the dialogue even further and give us another presentation on what's going on with immigrants. We all know that immigrants make up a very large percentage of the city of Worcester inhabitants, and it is a real issue what those folks are going through right now with the current federal administration. Anybody who has any interplay with immigrants knows that the amount of fear and emotions felt by our fellow Worcester citizens are enormous. And I think we all should educate ourselves on what's happening to these folks and what possibilities there could be to help immigrants in our community who are looking for a way to feel more secure. So, Alex Meridian, thank you so much for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Great. Well, thank you for having me here, Randy. And this is always a great opportunity to talk, although last time I was here was before the pandemic in 2019. So if anybody's on Zoom and wants to say something, I hope they can stop me and say something, right? So they can definitely do that. The way we wanted to do this is to do it in English and Spanish kind of consecutively, right? So just start it off and then repeat it back in Spanish, right?
That would be wonderful.
Okay. All right, great. So thank you very much for having me here. My name is Alex Meridian. I practice family-based and humanitarian immigration law, which means that I work with people who are survivors of crime, survivors of human trafficking, immigrant juveniles, people who are pleading or have pleaded asylum, refugees, essentially anybody who is looking for immigration benefits outside of the employment context. Mi nombre es Alex Meridian, soy un licenciado de inmigración aquí en Worcester. Yo practico la ley de inmigración enfocado en los casos de la visa U, la visa T para sobrevivientes de delitos criminales. Yo también hago los casos de asilo, de los casos de inmigrantes juveniles, y también yo enfoco en cualquier caso prácticamente que tiene que ver con inmigración, que no tiene que ver específicamente por el trámite a través del empleo. So what I'd like to talk about today is really some basic common sense principles that will help people in the community who are working with immigrant populations as well as the immigration population itself. Para hoy yo quisiera hablar de los asuntos de inmigración y también para las personas quienes sirven a la población de inmigrantes. So a los inmigrantes y a la gente trabajando todos los días con la población de inmigrantes para saber cómo ayudar a esa población. The way that I like to do this is I like to say we can't just stop and do nothing during this federal administration. La manera que yo quisiera hablar de la inmigración es que no podemos parar y hacer nada durante de la administración presidencial. The reason I say that is because so many good things are still going to happen during this administration. We cannot always afford to wait for a policy change. La razón que digo eso es que tantas cosas buenas van a suceder durante de esta administración a pesar de las dificultades de la administración actual. But I also want people to understand that we have to go into this well-educated. We need to understand whatever risks there are to assisting somebody in filing an immigration petition, and we have to be very strategic in how we file those applications or petitions. A la misma vez, yo quisiera resaltar que tenemos que estar bien preparados para cualquier aplicación o argumento. Antes de entregar cualquier documento o petición a la agencia de inmigración o hacer un trámite, tenemos que estar bien educados y trabajar estratégicamente en los asuntos. So what I want to talk about are some of the major areas that people tend to receive immigration benefits, and I want to tell people just enough to know, okay, there could be more to this case, and you need to stop and understand what the next steps are. Yo quisiera hablar de ciertas áreas, ciertos temas de inmigración y darle suficiente de información para que la gente pueda entender, ahora necesito más información, ahora tengo que parar y educarme de qué puedo hacer. So these categories are probably things that most people have heard of. Asylum, immigrant juvenile cases, protections for survivors of crime. Estas categorías son cosas que la gente posiblemente han oído de estos clases de casos. Por ejemplo, el asilo, beneficios para sobrevivientes de delitos criminales, sobrevivientes de cosas de delitos de traficar en personas y también para los inmigrantes juveniles. So I want to talk about these step by step and educate you on what each category is, what to look for, and what some of the standards are, just enough to know to ask for help or to get further guidance. Voy a hablar lo suficiente para darles suficiente de información para saber cuándo pedir más ayuda y más información. Let's start with asylum, and I'll talk about asylum generally because a lot of people already know what this is. They've heard of it, they may think that they know what it is. Asylum is what's on the news. Asylum is a benefit for people who have been persecuted or fear persecution on account of their race, religion, national origin, political opinion, or being part of some particular social group. Vamos a empezar con el asilo. El asilo es para la gente quienes tienen miedo y han sufrido persecución o tienen miedo de persecución por base de alguna característica protegida, por ejemplo, la raza, la religión, ser miembro de grupo específico, su nacionalidad o la etnicidad. The reason that it's so important to understand asylum is because particularly with the groups of people coming to Worcester, Haitian population, Afghan population, and Central American population, many people may have a viable claim to asylum, but they need to be able to tell their story and understand, and the community has to understand that some of these folks may have a path forward towards attaining asylum, but they just don't know how to get there. They don't know how to present the case. They don't know that their story is relevant to a claim of asylum, and I'll give a few examples of that. La razón que es tan importante saber del asilo es porque hay tanta gente llegando acá a Worcester de la población de Haití, de Centroamérica, de Afganistán, quienes ya tienen sus historias, ya tienen una historia posiblemente de trauma y no saben todavía la relevancia de esa historia al caso de asilo, que posiblemente serán elegibles para aplicar o poder aplicar para un asilo, pero todavía no saben la relevancia o cómo presentar esa historia para poder ganar algún beneficio, por ejemplo, asilo. In many cases, you will see that people have a profound history of trauma that they do not know is relevant. So for example, you could have people seeking because of harm based on their gender that they experienced in their country of origin. They were hit, they were attacked, they were hurt by an intimate partner, by a family member, and that is a story that can be very difficult to tell. So all of us in the community working with the population have to be aware that when we hear this type of story, that may give rise to eligibility for asylum. Not to say that it's a guarantee, not to say that we should file that automatically, but we should have some awareness as we elicit these stories of what asylum is and what some of the bases are. Por ejemplo, el género puede servir como una base en ciertos casos de asilo. Es importante cuando uno está empezando de describir su historia en el país de origen, entender que eso podría servir si uno fue empujado, atacado, abusado por miembro de la familia, por esposo, esposa, por padre, madre, que eso podría servir como una base para poder ganar un asilo. No es decir que automáticamente vamos a entregar la petición de asilo, pero es suficiente por lo menos investigar si será posible entregar una petición. There are many common stories that we hear that may give rise to asylum. For example, from people from Afghanistan, your gender, being a female who cannot go to school, could be a good claim for asylum. For example, being somebody who worked with the US government previously in Afghanistan could be a good basis for asylum. Or a political opinion against terrorist organizations like the Taliban could be a good basis for asylum. Por ejemplo, ciertos países tienen historias muy frecuentes que escuchamos. Por ejemplo, de Afganistán, hay mujeres quienes no tienen acceso a la escuela. Eso podría ser una base para un asilo, para poder ganar un asilo. Por ejemplo, hay personas quienes han trabajado para el gobierno previo, antes de llegar este grupo terrorístico al país, eso podría servir como una base para un asilo. O, por ejemplo, cualquier otra base, por ejemplo, la etnicidad puede servir en Afganistán como una base para el asilo. So we have to understand that when somebody has a story, when somebody explains, I'm afraid to go back to my country of origin, it has to be something more than the general conditions of the country. Not, I'm afraid to go back because I won't find a job, but what is underneath that? What's the core of their fear? And just to understand that story, and if they truly hold a fear of returning to their country, refer them to a licensed attorney who can evaluate if they may have a claim for asylum. So, en cualquier caso, cuando escuchamos que alguien tiene un miedo real de retornar al país, no como un miedo de, oh, yo no pienso que podría encontrar un trabajo allá, sino si hay un miedo de persecución, de maltratos, tenemos que respetar ese miedo y entonces referir al caso a un licenciado quien puede analizar qué clase de caso es o si hay una base para un asilo. So it's just very important to hear those stories because in general, what I say with asylum cases and really with all immigration cases, when you're looking for a benefit, what I always say is, do you have a story and is it a sad story? Are you basically eligible under the law? Are you a good fit? Does your case fit into the law? And then do I like you? As a matter of discretion, do I want to grant this? That's what the cases really come down to, 3 factors. That's not a legal analysis, that's just overall what the cases really come down to. Es muy importante elicitar la historia. La razón es que los casos básicamente tenemos 3 factores que controlan la determinación del caso. Si hay una historia de la persona, posiblemente una historia triste de persecución, maltrato, trauma. Número 2, si el caso cabe bien en el esquema legal. Y número 3, si el juez o la jueza le gusta al cliente o a la persona aplicando para el asilo. Eso no es un análisis legal, sino una manera simple para pensar, una manera sencilla de pensar de los casos, porque prácticamente si podemos demostrar que la persona sí tiene un miedo, es un miedo creíble, un riesgo alto, la persona califica basado en la ley, si él o ella es buen candidato basado en la ley, y si la persona tiene buen carácter, eso serían los factores esenciales en todos los casos para cualquier beneficio de inmigración. So with that said, we're going to move on from asylum and think about a couple of other areas where you may hear some common themes. Some things that you may hear on a practical level with whomever you're working with or from family or friends that may qualify people for an immigration benefit that they could not have thought or might not have thought of previously. So vamos a continuar hablando de otras bases de beneficios de inmigración. Por ejemplo, bases cuando están en conversación con amigos, familia o cualquier persona con quienes trabajan ustedes, temas de historias que pueden causar o provocar un beneficio para la persona y posiblemente no saben que eso sería una base para un caso de inmigración. Por ejemplo, let's talk about U visas and T visas. So a U visa, and this is just painting very broadly, this is a basic explanation, is for a survivor of certain crimes who has suffered a crime and has cooperated with law enforcement and has suffered a significant result in their own personal life because of the harm. Una visa U es para un sobreviviente de un delito criminal, ciertos actos violentos típicamente de delitos criminales, quien esa persona es sobreviviente, ha colaborado con la policía o la fiscal y que esa persona ha tenido o ha sufrido un efecto grave en su vida personal por causa de sufrir el acto violento. In many of these cases, we often see domestic violence. We often see robberies. We often see people who have been hit, hurt, attacked physically. And these crimes are happening here in the United States. That's what we're talking about. Sometimes people get confused and think, oh, it's a crime in the country of origin. That would really be more towards asylum. I'm talking about a U visa, which would be a crime victim here in the U.S. So, típicamente, frecuentemente, hemos visto gente quienes han sufrido de actos criminales aquí en los Estados Unidos, personas quienes han sufrido de actos violentos, por ejemplo, un robo, un ataque físico, alguien pegar, empujar a esa persona, frecuentemente podría ser la violencia doméstica, que sea la causa o que provoca un buen base para una visa U. Y esa persona tiene que colaborar, reportar a la policía, a la fiscalía, pero estamos hablando de delitos criminales que han pasado acá en los Estados Unidos. Frecuentemente la gente piensa, oh, sería un acto criminal, un delito allá en el país de origen. No, sería un acto aquí en los Estados Unidos, dentro de los Estados Unidos. Similarly, you have T visas. T visas are for survivors of sex trafficking or labor trafficking. Similar, tenemos la visa T para sobrevivientes de traficadores en labor o traficadores en sexo. This could be somebody, you have to think openly and creatively about this, because a T visa could even include somebody who is labor trafficked by their own violent domestic partner. It could be somebody who is trafficked into a forced prostitution scenario right here in Worcester. Trafficking does not always have to have that international component that I think people would typically think of, like I was brought across the border for purposes of this. The trafficking can happen right here, and we've done cases where it's happened right here in Worcester or in Massachusetts. So think openly when somebody has been forced to either work or perform sexual acts. Think about a T visa. I'm not saying that they definitely qualify. That has to be analyzed in detail and run up against the criteria. But think about it, because we do often see that acts of severe violence can really relate to some kind of a trafficking case. So con la visa T siempre tenemos que analizar muy bien y pensar creativamente, porque frecuentemente las víctimas de traficadores sufren en el contexto de una relación íntima. Podría ser el esposo mismo quien es el traficador. Podría ser alguien conocido quien trafica a la persona, que fuerza a una persona a participar en prostitución. Y los actos de traficadores, los maltratos pueden suceder acá en el estado de Massachusetts y acá en Worcester. No tiene que ser un acto internacional. Típicamente, frecuentemente la gente piensa de esta clase de acto y piensan, oh, habría algún aspecto internacional. Yo fui traído acá a los Estados Unidos para el propósito de servir y trabajar para esta persona. Pero el acto puede suceder completamente aquí en la ciudad o completamente aquí en el estado de Massachusetts si la persona es inmigrante o migrante sufriendo los actos de traficadores acá y es un acto de labor forzado o contacto sexual forzado. Eso podría servir como una base para una visa T. No es garantizar que definitivamente calificaría o podemos entregar esa petición. Siempre tenemos que analizar en contexto de la ley y analizar muy bien los casos, pero podría ser. So, tenemos que siempre estar abiertos a oír esta clase de historia. Some of the ways that you might know on a practical level that somebody has suffered from trafficking, and the reason I want to focus on this is a lot of this gets missed. A lot of the times people don't recognize that something is trafficking. Questions you can ask like, did your employer ever take your passport from you and say, you can't have your passport back, you have to perform this work? Did your employer ever say, you owe me this huge sum of money and now you have to work it off? Did your employer refuse to pay you? Did your employer force you to live in a certain location? Did you live with your employer? Those can be signals that this person may be in a vulnerable situation that could rise to the level of labor trafficking or sex trafficking. Unas de las maneras prácticas que podemos analizar o huir de los casos de víctimas de traficadores, podemos pensar creativamente y pensar, escuchar para ciertos temas. Por ejemplo, pueden preguntar, ¿has sufrido de algún acto violento en el trabajo? Su empleador ha quitado su pasaporte y ha dicho, no puede recibir para atrás su pasaporte hasta que usted hace esto. El empleador ha dicho, ustedes me deben una gran cantidad de dinero y tienen que trabajar hasta que no me deben nada más. Han dicho que no voy a pagar a usted. Han rechazado, negado el pago para trabajo completado. esas clases de acciones si forzan a uno vivir en cierta ubicación o si forzan a uno vivir con el empleador mismo. Esos pueden ser señales que alguien está en una posición muy vulnerable y podría llegar a un punto de una visa T o de ser víctima de traficadores. So let's always listen to what people are saying, because it's very hard for people to come forward and tell these stories. There can be a lot of barriers, such as education level. People may feel nervous to come forward and report to somebody what's happening to them. It can be language issues. So if you speak another language and you hear these stories, it's very important to take them seriously and get the person to an attorney. And a lot of times it can be even that people feel appreciative or grateful just to have the job, and they just say, well, I don't want to mess this up because I need the income to survive, even if it's an unjust situation. So tenemos que escuchar muy bien porque hay muchos obstáculos en escuchar esta clase de historia. Es difícil para alguien reportar lo que está sucediendo, si sea barrera de lenguaje, si sea miedo de que el empleador va a votar a esta persona. Posiblemente están en una posición muy vulnerable, pero necesitan eso sueldo mínimo para poder sobrevivir. So es muy importante escuchar muy bien si uno tiene el lenguaje para comunicarse con una persona y escucha de esta clase de persecución, de esta clase de maltrato, de esta clase de fraude contra una persona en el contexto del empleo o abuso sexual. Es muy importante comunicar bien con esa persona y referir a la persona a un licenciado quien puede analizar bien el caso. The last piece that I want to talk about is really immigrant juvenile status, which is for children who have been neglected, abused, or abandoned by one or both of their parents, who are under 21 years old, and who it would be in their best interest to remain in the United States versus return to their country of origin. These kids are frequently living in Worcester, and they're in our public schools, they're in our community, they're working full-time, and it's very important to understand that if a child says to you, and when I say child, under 21 years old, that they don't live with both their parents, or they don't have a great relationship with both their parents, that should be a signal that you need to have this analyzed for special immigrant juvenile status. I'm going to tell you why all these benefits matter so much at the end, because I'll kind of explain what people will actually get at the end of the day from applying for these things. But special immigrant juvenile status would be a great path forward for many young people, and there is a process through the family court or the juvenile court, and then through the immigration court and or the immigration agency for that person to receive a permanent status. So if you hear from a young person who says, I don't live with both my parents, I don't have a good relationship with both my parents, and that they would prefer to remain in the United States versus return to the country of origin, think about that for the immigrant juvenile status. So la última categoría de que yo voy a hablar para hoy es la situación de inmigrante juvenil. Este clase de estatus puede servir o uno puede calificar si esa persona es joven de menos de 21 años de edad, no es 18 años de edad, sería cualquier persona menos que 21 años de edad. Esta persona ha sido abandonado, negligido o abusado por madre o padre. Esta persona sería en la mejor interés de esta persona que permanecerá acá en los Estados Unidos en vez de retornar a su país de origen. Esta clase de beneficio es muy importante porque sería un camino a un estatus permanente acá en los Estados Unidos, y hay un proceso a través de la Corte de Familia o a través de la Corte Juvenil para conseguir una orden protectiva e eventualmente presentar el caso en frente de la Corte de Inmigración o a la agencia UCIS para eventualmente recibir el estatus permanente. Es importante para todo el mundo saber si uno encuentra a un joven menos que 21 años de edad quien dice, yo no resido con mis padres o no vivo con uno de mis padres. No tiene que ser abandono o negligencia de los dos padres, solo un padre o madre sería suficiente, abandono por cualquier. Si este joven dice que él o ella prefería permanecer acá en los Estados Unidos en vez de regresar a su país de origen, entonces eso sería el señal para este joven investigar la posibilidad de la situación de inmigrante juvenil. So in summary, all of these benefits that I've talked about, asylum, U visas, T visas, special immigrant juvenile status, these are eventual paths to not only a permanent status in the United States, but they're also a path or a defense in many cases to physical removal from the United States. So that's that's the stakes of what we're talking about, and why we don't want to miss these stories. We don't want to hear these histories and have people say, I wish I knew 5 years ago that I could have applied for that. La importancia de estos clases de casos de asilo, la visa U, la visa T, el estatus, la situación de inmigrante juvenil, es que todos estos beneficios de que he hablado son caminos a la residencia permanente en los Estados Unidos eventualmente, y también pueden servir como defensas parciales o completos en contra de la deportación. Así que nunca queremos que uno sería elegible y nunca encontramos esta clase de beneficio, nunca investigamos si sería buena idea. I hope that this kind of presentation gives people hope that there's still something positive that can be done for certain people. I also never want to give a false hope that every person will qualify under these categories. No one should be touching these cases in terms of actually submitting them to a court or to the immigration agency without an attorney reviewing it. But you need to work with people, hear their story, and you may be surprised after a few meetings how many people really have a story. So it does take time in some cases to get to the bottom of somebody's true fear or true reasons for coming to Worcester or coming to the United States, but it's well worth it because the stakes could not be higher for many people. And it's a great feeling when somebody is finally comfortable to disclose to you that they're ready to share their trauma history or what it is that their fear is, and then you're able to then move forward and help them. So yo quisiera que todo el mundo tiene esperanza, que en muchos casos hay algo que podemos hacer. A veces toma tiempo, a veces tarda tiempo para uno sentir cómodo, cómoda en compartir su historia. A veces toma tiempo para esa persona desarrollar una relación con ustedes y sentir cómodo en hablar, pero cada persona tiene su historia. No es decir que hay una esperanza en todos los casos. Nunca quisiera dar una esperanza falsa y pretender que todo el mundo tiene un camino a través de estas categorías mencionadas. Pero con eso dicho, siempre quisiera que todo el mundo tiene esa oportunidad de comunicarse bien con la familia, con cualquier persona en la comunidad. Y si hay una historia, si uno comparte la trauma, la historia, las razones reales que esa persona ha determinado que es una necesidad venir acá a Worcester, a Massachusetts o a los Estados Unidos, y si esa historia parece como una historia grave, una historia seria, entonces es esencial que esa persona tiene asesoría con un licenciado antes de entregar cualquier petición a la corte o a la agencia UCIS. So with all that said, I'm going to stop there. If there are questions about this, I'd be happy to answer them. And Randy, you have more than enough experience to comment on any of this, so I'll leave it to you to do that. So yo voy a parar allá y definitivamente si hay una duda, pregunta, yo puedo contestar las preguntas y definitivamente el licenciado Feldman tiene bastante experiencia para comentar en todo lo mencionado también.
Okay, Alex, thank you so much. One of the great things about your presentation is that there are not that many lawyers, certainly including immigration lawyers, whose goal in life is to do the hardest kind of work, the most humanitarian kind of work, and to dedicate themselves primarily to helping those people who most need help. So the four things that you described, it's even hard to find an immigration lawyer who's going to be willing to do those things that you just described so eloquently, and which you have dedicated so much of your life towards doing. So from the immigrant community, of which I consider myself a part, I want to thank you so much for all the work that you do, and all the work that you do that others are not willing to do, and the way that you so clearly and eloquently laid out for all of us what people may not see because they're unfamiliar. And if they hear it, they may not develop it, And if they develop it, they may not have the legal knowledge to know whether or not this is actionable to the extent that someone is actually going to win a benefit out of the court, the immigration system, and the immigration court system. So you identifying and explaining all of those things and committing yourself to do that kind of work is what we all owe you an incredible round of applause and a heartfelt thank you for
Thank
doing
you.
all that work.
Thank you for that. And if I could comment on that too, you're right in that these things take a lot of time and it takes a lot of energy. And few practical pieces of advice, because there are so many barriers to getting that story. I mean, I'm talking about it like somebody's just gonna walk up to you and say, I'm living with my employer and they've taken my passport. I mean, people don't talk like that. You have to engage in the conversation, build a relationship. So just a few practical tips about that. Really anything you can read and study on a trauma-informed interview to really have that conversation over time on the terms of the person you're talking to. And then, only then, you can start to little by bit build that trust and then ask those questions. Some of the practical questions, though, that I do ask, and again, people really have to weigh this in their own professional capacity because, of course, it wouldn't be appropriate, like if you're this person's, like you drive a taxi for them and you barely know them. I mean, you're not going to jump right in and say, tell me about any time you were hit, hurt, attacked, harmed, or sexually abused. I mean, those are questions I ask routinely, and you have to get comfortable asking those questions. But certainly, anybody can ask, tell me a little bit about what brought you here. How do you feel about returning to your country? Does that concern you? Start the conversation there and then go from there. I think the saddest part, and you've probably seen this over your years of practice, people really don't talk. People don't converse. They don't know how to have a conversation and sit down. And a really practical tip is you have to let people know, I have the time to hear anything you want to tell me. I'm not afraid of anything you have to say. I've heard a lot of stories before, and it's not going to offend me, whatever it is that you have to say. It's not going to bother me. I'd be happy to hear it. And I don't mind if you cry, and I don't mind if it's upsetting to you, and I'm going to respect that. You're in charge. But to kind of set the tone like that, because otherwise people are not going to just come in, and I'm making it sound like you're going to hear all these things right off the bat. You're not. It's going to start with a lot of people telling you, this is not a judgment, but a lot of people are going to say because they want you to be, they want to impress, they want you to feel like they're appreciative of being here. And I feel that people have a right to be here, they don't owe me anything. But people will say, well, I came here to work. I came here for a better life. I came here for better opportunities. There's usually a lot more that's underlying that. When people really suffer, it usually, or a lot of the time, has something to do with their race, their background, who they are in terms of gender, who they are in terms of indigenous background. So there can be a lot of factors that will not come right on the surface layer. So just to be very clear, these factors are not going to come right to the surface immediately, but you have to put the time in to hear it. So thank you for your comments, and I just don't want to mislead anybody saying you're going to hear one of these four things right off the bat.
Well, good word to the wise. Let me ask one question, and then let's open it up to the rest of the commission. The U cases that I've done for someone who's been a victim of a crime and helps the prosecution to prosecute somebody for the crime. The way in Worcester that it usually works. In other localities, the police department sometimes will assist you in getting a U visa. In Worcester, it's left to the prosecutor to do that. And oftentimes the prosecutor doesn't want to do it until the end of the case because they don't want the defense attorney for the person accused of the crime to say, were you given anything in return for this testimony? And then you have to say, well, I was told I was going to be helped with a U. So they wait till the end of that. But I've only done it for people who've been the victims of crime. And I'm not 100% sure if you could just be a witness to a crime and not be the victim and still get a U.
That's a great question. So there are certain bystander benefits where you can derive, and you have to show, typically you have to show a certain relation to the victim, but it's possible. We were just talking about this morning in my office, actually. So if you're a witness and you cooperate, but you suffered something in the process of witnessing the crime, think about it. I mean, you need a one-on-one assessment to really analyze if you might be eligible, but I don't want you to throw the case away and say it's impossible, because it's quite possible. Kind of related also to what you're saying, Randy, is that The DA's office certainly does certify the U certs, but the Worcester Police Department has also been willing to certify in a lot of cases. And to clarify, yes, you may not on the first try get a certification fairly because, you know, they, like you say, they want to see that the case is prosecuted, followed through with. And the standard is that somebody has to cooperate reasonably with law enforcement. Now, that's subjective. What's a reasonable level of cooperation? If I'm a domestic violence victim and I'm totally petrified to go to court because I think I'm going to be attacked in the courthouse and maybe I don't show up, that could actually be reasonable. You're going to have to fight a little bit to get the certification because your law enforcement agency or entity might not want to certify right away, but you could maybe be able to argue it. Language barriers I've had where somebody doesn't cooperate fully in the investigation, but then the reports are looked at years later and there wasn't really a good interpreter available and there was some confusion and the police report had the phone number wrong and that's why the person never answered their call. Those could be argued, you know, and the Worcester Police Department and the DA's office both have been great to work with. So certainly I wouldn't throw them away just because it's not so clean. I'm not going to say it's easy, but if you're a bystander victim, in some cases it's possible to pull off the U certification and eventually U visa. And if the case was not fully investigated, you may want to just look at the why behind that. Why wasn't it investigated and what was the participation of the victim or survivor reasonable? And that can be argued, you know. So again, no guarantees, but the reason I'm bringing such a hopeful message on this is because I see a lot of people talking about the defensive piece of immigration. You know, if ICE comes, what do you do? And you and I have spoken about this. ICE may do what they're going to do. We have to do what we're going to do. And we can't spend time not applying for benefits to which people are entitled. We can't be reckless. We can't file things frivolously. We definitely won't file things frivolously. We don't want to file things that are weak, but we need to be creative and go after them. So I hope that's probably more than you asked me to answer.
No, that's good to know. Good to know. Okay, commissioners. Yes, Patricia.
Oh,
Okay, Bernard, was that you?
so Father Jonathan, I have no idea what I did, but I can't see anyone anymore. And I don't know how to raise my hand anymore because I just see nothing but the phone call thing. But I don't, yeah. But I want to just quickly say thank you for that wonderful presentation. And thank you for being bilingual with it there because I'll be able to forward it to a lot of my parishioners who will find this as a great benefit. I find more and more each week I'm learning so much more about these issues that are going to be very beneficial to a lot of the people, a lot of clergy work with in the city here. So I want to thank you for the wonderful presentation there. And it's very helpful at these moments here. So thank you for your time this evening. And I probably will be reaching out to you very shortly with some issues that I have that I know you could probably help with.
Sure, thank you.
Anybody else?
Hey, Alex, it's great to see you.
Likewise, Kerry.
First, just want to, again, thank you immensely for your work and for this presentation. I did have a question because I think we've all heard stories of ICE agents taking people from immigration appointments, waiting for people at courthouses. So what would you say to individuals that may want to apply for one of these pathways but are concerned about showing up for appointments, showing up to court, and essentially putting themselves on the government's radar in that respect?
It's a great question, Kerry, and I want to be very clear on that. That's an assessment that has to be done every single time before an application is filed. For example, right now, pursuant to federal court orders, USCIS is once again accepting initial applications for DACA. My position on that is for most people, I am not willing to file that initial application at this time. I hate telling people that there's something that you may be eligible for, but I'm not going to file it for you. But everybody has their risk level, and you always have to do what's in the best interest of the individual. Every time something is filed with USCIS, that person's name, address, and eventually biometric information is turned over to immigration enforcement. It's turned over to Department of Homeland Security, which has its enforcement side and its benefit side. So absolutely, it is plausible that somebody could apply and then get referred over to an immigration judge. I have somebody right now who went to go pick up his children from, he was the sponsor. The kids are both pursuing immigrant juvenile status. he went to go pick up the children, and he himself was put into removal proceedings, even though he's literally there to sponsor his own children. So that can happen. So those analyses have to be looked at every time somebody's about to have any contact with any immigration official. With that said, in some cases, and this is where it becomes important to have a good understanding of how strong the cases are. That's not for necessarily you all to determine, it's for really an attorney to determine how strong is the case. If somebody has a generalized fear of returning to their country and they say, well, I'm afraid I'll be extorted there, those are not good claims. If somebody says, I've been abused through my entire childhood, I have physical scarring, and I'm afraid that my same abuser is still there looking for me, that may be a better claim. The reason I'm talking about the different types of claims and the strength is, it's then a balancing test. What level of risk am I provoking by submitting this? What chance do we have of winning if we file this affirmatively, proactively with the agency, versus the risk that it be denied and sent over to a judge and potentially put in that process, that defensive process, which if you lose can ultimately result in removal from the United States. That definitely has to be looked at. In terms of going to different courts or different appointments, I can speak to our local field office. I have not seen any enforcement in our local field office, but that should always be considered when you file and before you attend. That's something you have to talk to an attorney about, what the risks are. In general, though, I consider a local field office. I'm there a couple days a week, and I haven't seen any kind of enforcement there, and I've been successful on my petitions there for family-based matters and so forth, but that's anecdotal. It has to be looked at each time, certainly. So it is unfortunate when you have to give somebody the news that it's too risky to file something, but that's good advice in many cases.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, Pat.
Hi, Alex.
Chair.
Thank you very much for this presentation. It was great. I had a question because you were talking about people who may not understand that they are sort of eligible for these types of, specialized processes. Is there a requirement for there be some like contemporaneousness between the event which gives rise to that and ultimately they make claim to it?
Yes, that's a great question. So for asylum claims, for example, in general, there's a 1-year filing deadline. You would typically want to file that within 1 year of arrival to the United States. But there are a number of exceptions to that rule. One of the biggest exceptions for a lot of populations is if they had no legal necessity to file right away. So for example, if somebody entered on a student visa or a visitor visa and they had a 6-year period of time, like let's say on a long-term student visa, and they didn't apply until 3 years after arrival, but they were still on that visa, that could be an exception because they'll say, well, the reason I didn't apply right away is I was kind of waiting to see if something else came about, if another path came forward, if I ended up going through a marriage process or an employment-based process, or they may say, well, I still had hope that the conditions in my country might change, but guess what, they didn't change, so now I'm applying. But I had no legal necessity to apply earlier. That could be an exception. Other exceptions can be change of circumstance in the country of origin. I've seen situations where the ruling party of a country changes at a certain point, where an abuser that they're afraid of was actually here in the US, but then gets removed back to the country of origin. People who have a change in circumstance even around their own identity or their gender identity, that could be a change in circumstances that could toll or extend that kind of general 1-year filing deadline. Anytime somebody has a significant chunk of time in the asylum context between the acts of persecution and then the present moment, that's a concern because somebody could say, well, you don't have a future fear anymore. You had a harm in the past, but due to the passage of time and maybe some changes in your personal and the country conditions, that fear has been rebutted. There's no fear any longer. A couple other ways around that could be looked at are humanitarian asylum without going totally into the weeds, but if the past persecution is so severe that it may, under certain precedent, do away with the need to even prove a fear in the future. It could just be on a humanitarian basis that the asylum is granted because the past persecution was so bad. I've succeeded on those in a lot of cases with childhood sexual abuse, incest, really severe gender-based violence, those type of claims. Or there's another path called other serious harm, where maybe persecution per se on that same ground is not likely to occur, but there would be other harms such as worsening mental health status if the person has a certain diagnosis, or inaccess to certain medications that the person may need, or severe societal discrimination to such a level that the person might be excluded from day-to-day life. So yes, there are some time limitations of when you really want to file, and the passage of time can be a problem for an asylum claim. There are some exceptions that can be worked on. For UNT visas, it's not ideal to have a tremendous passage of time because your law enforcement agency, if it goes beyond the statute of limitations for the underlying crime, may push back and say, well, why should we bother certifying this? There are ways to argue that and negotiate on that, so I don't want to foreclose the possibility just because of the passage of time. And then special immigrant juvenile status, there is a hard cutoff at 21. You can't even apply after 21. And what people should know is that you really want to start the process much sooner. You don't want to wait till even a month before, because then you need to get a probate or juvenile court to hear the matter. You need to then file an application with USCIS. Little self-interest, I personally prefer that somebody come to me with like more than 6 months on the clock still, although we've pulled them off on a faster timetable than that. But there are time limits, hard time limits on special immigrant juvenile status. So great question.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
To the chair, I appreciate the presentation and the expertise that you presented tonight to the commissioner. But what I have the question is about verification when ICE go into a home and take out maybe the breadwinner or what have you. Have you had any cases where there's discrimination in housing, people losing all the benefit, what have you, there's no one there? What do you do in a case of that, in that situation?
Bernard, can you make that clear? I wasn't sure if it didn't come across about discrimination or about ICE's ability
Yes.
to go into a house. What exactly is it that
Yes,
you're asking us to
when
isolate on?
The question is, even asking the commissioner, have we had any complaints about like housing discrimination when ICE go into the home and take out the breadwinner? And have there been any cases of how to deal with this to rectify that type of situation?
It's a great question, and Randy, you might want to comment on this too. I mean, one example is there was this massive housing, I'm not going to say a housing, it wasn't public housing, I don't think, it was a private housing tower in Chicago that was overtaken by ICE agents, and they just arrested a huge number of people. And there were some very serious constitutional questions about what authority they had to enter that and the methods that were used. The practical problem I see is that ICE is behaving in ways that may be unconstitutional. And once those acts are done, people are then being fast-tracked to detention facilities, they're being fast-tracked out of state, and they're being fast-tracked into jurisdictions where immigration judges may be less favorable to providing certain due process protections and to providing ultimately approval on some of the humanitarian benefits I've talked about, like asylum. They may have a low proportion of cases granted. So on a constitutional level, on a kind of on a philosophical level, on a human rights level, it's a huge problem. On a practical level, the only ways that I can really speak to kind of combat that would be to work on habeas corpus or federal complaints, which I really don't do at this time. I've done a couple in the past, but that kind of work, which there are lawyers who focus on that, and policy work and activism around that. But on a practical level, I think that is happening, that certain communities are being over-policed. There's no denying by ICE agents, and it's being used to expand policing more broadly. But what do you think on that, Randy?
Okay, so my presentation is going to address that in broad sense and in a detailed way. So I can start that, but before I do, any other questions, or can I move on? Okay, so Alex brought up something called habeas corpus protection. So for folks who are not sure, what that means is this. When you study schoolyard rock about the 3 branches of government and all of that. Well, what Alex and I mostly do is we work against or with the executive branch of government, the Immigration Service, USCIS, the court system, the judges we go see, the Board of Immigration Appeals that we do our appeals to. That's all part of the executive branch of government. There's also the judicial branch of government. a completely different branch of government than we do our day-to-day work with. It is very hard right now to find an immigration lawyer available to take a difficult immigration case, period. It is even harder to find an immigration lawyer who will go into the third branch of government, the judiciary, and say what the executive branch is doing is unconstitutional. Because our training is basically in the executive branch practice, and you need a training of another lawyer who says federal practice, as different as that is than executive branch practice, I'm down for learning that and doing that and exercising that. And very oftentimes, those people, if it's not an agency or some sort of institution that's doing that in goodwill, those lawyers charge an awful lot of money, more money than most of our clients have. But when that does occur and when it is available, you go into these federal courts, you go to Boston and you say, my client was just picked up. I believe there's a constitutional issue here. We need that person to apply for habeas corpus relief, which is a Latin word that says, I need the body. Give me back the body of this human being. Take this person out of custodial detention, out of jail, and free this person. And you want to do that when you find a lawyer who'll do that. You want to do that before they're transferred to the Texas border or to Louisiana or sometimes to Vermont before they're taken there. And the U.S. government does that because they want a more favorable judge for their goals. And they know that if they're in New England or in New York, that our judges are not going to look at things in general the way a judge down south is likely to look at something. So it's a race to the courthouse if someone is able to find a federal court practicing immigration lawyer to be able to stop them from removing your client from detention in New England or in the Northeast and send them abroad. It's not an easy thing to do, but I just want to fill people in. When Alex talks about habeas corpus relief, that is federal branch, judiciary branch relief, and not something that he nor I do on a daily basis. And when we have a client who needs that, who could afford it, we have to scurry around trying to find someone to take that case. It's not an easy thing. Okay, so my part of the presentation, and Alex is probably similar to me in the sense that what happened on Eureka Street in Worcester is happening all over the nation. And what us practicing immigration lawyers had to do is learn who has what right on the street when ICE comes to take somebody in. Who has what rights in their own home when ICE comes to take somebody in. This is not what we do on a day-to-day level, as Alex just described what we do. This is a policy, a constitutional issue as it goes into this new environment of ICE enforcement under the Trump administration. So what Alex and I and many other lawyers of goodwill have been doing since the Trump administration started this ICE onslaught on immigrants is studying up on what advice we can give people about what rights do they have and what rights that they don't have. And it's not just Alex and I that have done it. The first document that we sent around to people, and we'll post it again after the meeting for the general public and for anyone who didn't get a chance to read it today, I sent it to, Pat and I sent it a little earlier today. Sorry, I didn't give you more lead time to read it. But the first document that I'm going to talk about is the State Attorney General of Massachusetts, Andrea Campbell. She gave Know Your Rights guidance. That's what we generally term this as, Know Your Rights presentations. And I want to go over a few of those highlights. It's worth reading. It's very clear. You don't have to be a lawyer to read it. It's clear language for everybody. But I'm going to hit a few of the highlights on it. So one of the things that we want people to know is that most immigration enforcement is civil in nature, not criminal. So what does civil mean? Civil means you're not being accused of a crime. You're just being put in a process to have you leave the United States. Now, it's a very odd thing that happens at the border. If many people come as visitors, they overstay sometimes, they get married after they overstay, they get a green card, all is forgiven when you overstay. Same thing with students. But many people also come across the borders, usually Mexican-American border, sometimes Canadian-American border, without authorization. This is the craziest thing ever. When you cross that border without authorization, you are committing a crime. However, that crime is virtually never enforced as a crime. It's only if you did it 2 or 3 times where the government is likely to charge you with the crime of unlawfully crossing the border. What makes it even more confusing is that if you cross that border, you now can avail to yourself of a legal process, even though you unlawfully crossed the border. And during the Biden administration, much of this was truncated at the border, wasn't even attempted to control at the border, but said there's so many people, we're so overwhelmed, we're going to send you up to wherever you're going to go to, let's say Massachusetts, you're going to check in with ICE in Burlington, you're going to have a court date in Boston, now our court is Chelmsford for most people from where we live, here in Worcester County, and you're going to present whatever it is you want us to know in those venues. And in those venues, you can apply for a legal process, as Alex said, all the 4 things that he laid out: political asylum, special immigrant juvenile, there's violence against women relief that's available for men and women. All of these things, which we call relief from removal, relief from being ordered deported, are available to you in a legal process, even though you unlawfully cross the border. So this whole idea is civil in nature, no matter how the process began. So most of the time when ICE is looking for somebody, they're looking for trying to get you to leave the United States through some sort of process. Now, there's 2 ways ICE generally finds a person. One is what we call custodial, means you're in jail. Now, a small percentage of the people that Alex and I help, and I think a small percentage of immigrants, even those unlawfully present, commit crimes. A very small percentage. So because that small percentage is so small, most of our work is not done with people who ICE took out of a jail after they had conducted their sentence, after they were sentenced and had a crime. Increasingly, under the Trump administration, if somebody goes to the Worcester House of Correction, even overnight, if the police department can't keep them, so they send them over there and someone goes to bail them out on trespassing or something else, maybe domestic violence, if ICE finds you at that custodial area in the county jail, they will write you up and take you, most likely. On the other hand, the city of Worcester has made it very clear, not the state police, by the way, it's completely opposite. The city of Worcester has made it very clear that if you are charged here with a crime, we will not do ICE's job and identify you to ICE. However, if you are fingerprinted, when people are sent to court, they're sent to court in one of 2 ways. They're either fingerprinted because they were arrested, or they given a summons as if you got a speeding ticket. Both of those things can occur. If you are summoned into court, generally, ICE will not know about you. If you are fingerprinted, ICE generally will know about you. And in the current environment, ICE looks at people who are fingerprinted like the way a teacher corrects homework. They're all over this thing right now. So even if the Worcester Police Department, or definitely the state, the state troopers, even if they are not cooperating, although the state troopers, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and Maura Healey have made it very clear that we are not a sanctuary state. The city of Boston has made it very clear that it is a sanctuary city. The city of Worcester has said we are going to act like a sanctuary city, but we are not going to declare ourselves a sanctuary city. So we don't cooperate with ICE except whatever ICE finds from fingerprints they found. But if the state troopers arrest you driving an unlicensed operating of a motor vehicle, a DUI, like an OUI, operating under the influence of alcohol, they will cooperate with ICE, even though our state police will not. So this custodial way of finding people who have been arrested, detained, or jailed is a real thing, although it's not the largest part of, by any means, of, I think, Alex and my practice, right? So the other way that people get in trouble with ICE is what we call at-large or field enforcement. So what that means is when people are being arrested on the street, or which is increasingly how they're being arrested, it used to be a little bit more in their homes. But because so many people have done these kind of Know Your Rights presentations, the word is out that unless ICE has a judicial warrant. A judicial warrant means it's signed by a federal or a state court judge or magistrate. And it is indicated in specificity what they're looking for. It has a time limit of 14 days. It almost never happens in the immigration context. It will only ever happen, which is very rare, when it's a joint effort by the DEA or the AFT, whether they're looking for drugs or arms, and they're doing something together with the police. Other than that, there won't be a judicial warrant. And we have already told everybody, and everybody knows, that if there's no judicial warrant, if instead there is only an administrative warrant, which is a warrant that is issued by ICE itself, they just put a piece of paper out there that says warrant, and it's issued by ICE, that you do not have to open your door in your house if ICE comes knocking. And we tell people to tell the person to slip the warrant under the door, which is easier said than done when you're nervous. But so that you can see if it's a court warrant, which is almost never the case, or if it's an administrative warrant issued by ICE, which does not give them the authority to come into your apartment or your home unless you give permission. If you don't give permission, they can't come in. Now, the word has gone out on this, and because the word has gone out on this, ICE itself has decreased the use of this kind of approach to picking somebody up. What they do instead is they oftentimes find somebody's behavior. They leave their house in the morning. They go to work at 6 a.m. They go to this place. They return at this time. They take their kid to school at this time. They pick up their child from school at this time. We watch you for 3 or 4 days. You don't know we're watching you. And one morning, we surround you, or one evening, we surround you with 4 cars so that you can't get out. And we say, "Is this your name?" And then we take you away. And that's the way that ICE most often acts right now when they're picking somebody up. Now, when that occurs, when this first started to happen, and it happened on Eureka Street, everybody, understandably, because none of us knew this stuff yet, asked the wrong question. Everybody yelled, "Do you have a warrant? Do you have a warrant?" The truth is this: ICE has an incredible amount of authority on that street. It's a crying shame. It is what it is. So they do not need a warrant to pick you up on the street. And either they have one because it's administrative and they issued it themselves before they got there, or they're picking you up because they're under a reasonable suspicion that you're unlawfully in the United States and that you might flee if I don't pick you up. Now, unfortunately, those two things almost always go together, although there have been some lawsuits to try to separate those things. The things I'm speaking of are unlawfully, we have reasonable suspicion you're unlawfully present. That's one thing. And the second thing is that, and we're afraid you'll flee if we don't take you in. Now, there have been lawsuits. There was one in Chicago under the Biden administration that says, you as an ICE person can't just say, I know you're going to flee, so I'm just saying you're all going to flee. Whoever I think's unlawfully present is going to flee, so I'm automatically going to conclude both of those things. The lawsuit made them prove that it wasn't just your intuitive gut subjective feeling that says everybody who's unlawful is going to flee. You need to have some more backup to that legal conclusion. But that lawsuit has ended, and that lawsuit is not enacted within the United States generally now. So now they're just going to say, suspect that you're unlawfully present, we reasonably have concluded that, or we have probable cause that that's the case, and we will come pick you up. Now, an interesting thing about the driver's licenses in Massachusetts, now that you can have a driver's license in Massachusetts, no one at the state level is allowing ICE to look at our database and say, we gave these people licenses even though they're not lawfully present in the United States. Our state does not do that. However, it is not hard for law enforcement people to look up what your address is once they have identified you, and that's probably the easiest way for them to figure out what your address is, once they have otherwise identified you as someone who they think is unlawfully present in the United States. So this becomes a very hard problem for people who need that license, because the alternative is even worse. In the old days, you would be picked up for driving without a license. Now you're not picked up for driving without a license because you have a license. But that license does give identifying information, but it is not the primary source of identifying you. It's a secondary source once they've already identified you. But I'm just bringing all that up to talk about the way that ICE oftentimes picks people up. They don't need a warrant. And the proper question is not, do you have a warrant? Do you have a warrant? People thought that because they confused the issue between private and public places. So what the law says is that in public places, ICE does not need a judicial warrant. In private places, it does. So what the heck's the difference? Okay. In your home, you have a Fourth Amendment right, a reasonable expectation of privacy. Everybody agrees. Nobody can come into your home and get you unless they have a warrant, a judicial warrant, or you let them in. A public place, a road, you're driving a car, you're walking. Here's some harder ones. A church, a school, a hospital. How much of that entity, that business, that institution is public? And how much is private? Well, it seems that the parking lot would certainly be public. And it seems that, let's say in a restaurant or in a church, the areas or in a hospital where people cannot walk into and are not usually found waiting, congregating, those areas, like the quarters of a priest's church that is the priest's office, or the doctor or the hospital's emergency room where they actually do the actual procedures, those are private. Those ICE cannot go into. But could they go into a church, a place where the congregants are having their congregation meet on a public way, and anybody can walk into that church or that synagogue or that mosque and join in on that service? Probably that's a public place. So, and a school. Nowadays, schools are mostly locked down. Not universities. On universities, dorms will probably be locked down. Other areas wouldn't be locked down. But in public schools, the whole thing's locked down. You need permission to enter. When you need permission to enter, that's now a private place. So the city of Worcester that has said, we're not letting, and the city of Worcester was one of the first people to publicly say in the US, we're not letting anybody into our public schools without a judicial warrant. ICE is not entering our public schools without a judicial warrant. So when Alex and I and everybody else started to get ready for this new environment and give talks on what your rights are and what rights ICE's are, and then the Attorney General and the City of Worcester have all come out with sheets of information to let everybody know about what we're talking about tonight, what their rights are and what their rights aren't. Here's another one, and we saw this on Eureka Street. Bystanders. What rights do bystanders have? And what rights do the person being taken have? Well, you do have the right to remain silent. There's no doubt about that. Everybody has a constitutional right to remain silent, both the person that ICE is trying to take and the bystander. is it always the best thing to remain silent? That's a hard call. Sometimes yes, and sometimes no. If immigration seems to have identified you and you think they've made a mistake, you think you have a green card, for instance, or you're a U.S. citizen, well, the last thing you want to do is remain silent. You want to say, I have my papers, they're in my wallet, I have my papers, I can have somebody deliver them to me where I am. How would we go about doing this, right? But if you're going to be taken away and you don't want to give information and you're what we call a collateral arrest, meaning you're a bystander and you're not sure if they're going to take you or not, and you don't want to give up that information, and it looks like ICE is busy with whoever they're trying to get, you might not want to volunteer it. It depends on a lot of things. But if you don't volunteer it, they might use force in the sense of a threat to take you away in order to get you to speak. Now, if you're a bystander, whether you are unlawfully present in the United States or whether you are a U.S. citizen, you don't have the right to impede or obstruct ICE. You can and often will be criminally charged if you do that. So in many cases, in many locales, people are so angry and agitated over the overall injustice of what ICE is doing, they think that this is a matter of political protest. And I'm going to do it anyway, and you can do with me what you want. But I am not going to sit here and let you just take people away who lived in the United States for a very long time, who've done nothing, or who are just very sympathetic, or just because they have a right to be here as migrants, and in their eyes at least, of coming and going in different countries. Maybe they don't like the laws and borders of nations. Maybe they don't like nationalism as an overriding way that we organize the world. But it does have legal consequences if you do impede immigration or you do obstruct them. And certainly if you intentionally put your hands on a police officer. And whether you intentionally did that or not while you're resisting is a matter that probably the Worcester courts will be figuring out in the coming months. So those are some of the harder issues. Now, one of the hardest issues that I've come across, and Alex, please jump in whenever you want, because I don't know about you, Alex, but, this is all stuff I had to learn for the current environment, right? This is not what I did, what you did for all your years, what I did for my 34 years before this. This is not what I did, right? So we're all learning together when it comes to this kind of stuff. If somebody is taken in, a good question to ask that person being taken in is there a family member you want me to call? And see if you can get a phone number for that family member. And do you have a lawyer? Those are probably the best questions to ask. You can ask where they're going to, you can ask that person, or you can ask ICE where they're going to take you. You can ask ICE, why are you detaining the person? Why are you arresting the person? What's the reason? They don't need a warrant, so it's probably not worth asking that. And what's your badge number? You can ask all those questions. This is the sad truth. ICE does not have to answer those questions to a bystander or to that person. Them wearing uniforms that identify them as ICE employees or AFT employees or DEA employees with ICE, those jackets or vests or those things they're wearing, so far the courts have said that's enough identification. You don't have to see their name. You don't have a right to see their badge number. And I know this one hurts a lot. You don't have a right to see their face. So if ICE was so concerned about being identified, doxxed, being their location, their family, where they live being identified, then I wish that we had stronger laws to punish people who do those kind of things, but then insist that you show your face, just like normal police have to show their face. But so far, that is not the law. You can cover your face. So that's sort of where we are with that. Now, this is when the rubber really hits the road, okay, this is what happens. ICE comes and they ask somebody a question. And they ask this question, are you this person? Now, the truth is, they have a short amount of time where they're allowed to question anybody, and then that person can say, am I under arrest or am I not under arrest? They have a period of time where they don't have to make that decision on arresting you or not, where they're allowed to inquire about your immigration status. So that period of time is not clearly defined in law how long that is. But that they have a right to do that. As you can see, ICE has an awful lot of rights, right? So they have a right to inquire about, are you legally in the United States? Now, there's many times where they simply don't know if they have the right person, or if it's a collateral arrest, it's someone who they don't know anything about. They're just in the wrong place at the wrong time, next to that person, in the car with that person, traveling to or from work with that person, maybe in that person's apartment. They're in the restaurant. Let me go into the restaurant one, because there's so many restaurants. So when we call it the public and private, the place where customers eat, that is a public place. The kitchen and the office of management, that is a private place. So if the restaurant owner has the nerve, ICE will back down. They should back down if you say, I'm not letting you into the kitchen. That's not a public place. The public's not allowed to walk into the kitchen, right? So that's the public-private differentiation. So, but going back to the inquiry. So they're inquiring about somebody who's next to somebody in the kitchen, let's say, or let's say not the kitchen, outside the kitchen, and let's say, for instance, people ran out the back door of the kitchen, and ICE caught up with the person. If the fact of running, unfortunately, is going to be enough for them to have reasonable suspicion. That's why running is often not a good idea. You've identified yourself in their eyes. In fact, the real shame of it, as we saw in Chicago 2 weeks ago, is that a U.S. citizen kid ran out of Walgreens when they were looking for somebody, and they used that to arrest the U.S. citizen kid who was crying bloody murder. I'm a U.S. citizen. I was born here. I'm a high school senior. And ICE was like, how do we know? You ran. We'll figure this out down at ICE. And they have the right to take you for up to 48 hours to figure out what your status is. Now, many times they don't need 48 hours, like in the case in Chicago. But how does that help you? When you're a U.S. citizen, you're a person of color, you were grabbed because that's one of the factors that they may be using. You running was certainly another one. You working, availing yourself for employment outside of Home Depot might be another one. Those kind of factors that they start to stack, they can take people away who are U.S. citizens. And so far, the courts have said your reasonable suspicion was reasonable, and we're going to allow you to be taken away. Now, the amount of tears that should be shed over this situation are enormous. The amount of authority that the federal government has to control our borders and do that kind of work protecting the sovereignty of the land has always been enormous in virtually every nation, and certainly in our nation, and gives this kind of authority to the executive branch to do these kind of things until a court tells them no. Now, will this Supreme Court tell them no? Will they set a criteria so that those factors are not enough? Not yet. Maybe not in the next 3 years. But right now, the amount of authority that ICE has to do those things is vast, unfortunately. So the first document about all of this is from the Attorney General of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and it goes on to say a couple other details that are worth knowing. One is that folks who are detained by ICE, they have a right to a lawyer, but one is not assigned and paid for by the government, like if you were charged in a criminal matter. Everyone has a right, whether you can afford it or not, and the government will assign a attorney for you if you are accused of a crime, but not if you are accused of a civil infraction, an ICE infraction. Secondly, the federal government has its own law. Like I said, they consider that they have 48 hours to figure this out, but states also have their own law. So we have a case in Massachusetts called Lund versus the Commonwealth, and Lund stands for the fact that when you finish your time before a judge in a courtroom, or when you finish your time in your detention or jail, if ICE did not come to pick you up, the government has no authority. The state government says, we will not keep you for those 48 hours that ICE thinks it has, for them to be able to come pick you up. So for instance, one time I had a client who was, they thought she was driving without a license. She had a work card, but she couldn't prove anything more about her legal status. She was taken in by the Shrewsbury police on a Friday night. There was nobody who, ICE said we won't be able to pick her, no, I'm sorry, Saturday morning. ICE said we won't be able to pick her up until Monday. The Shrewsbury police kept her because that was a law that allowed it at that point, 48 hours for ICE to come pick her up. Well, the Supreme Judicial Court of Massachusetts says we are not giving anybody the ability to deprive someone of their liberty for 48 hours who is not subject to criminal holding and detention. So there's no longer waiting for ICE to pick somebody up 48 hours. If ICE is there, that's why ICE is allowed into Massachusetts courthouses. The Biden administration wouldn't let ICE go into any courthouses, but if there's not a state law preventing that, but ICE is usually there if they want to pick you up either outside the courthouse or outside the courtroom to pick you up and take you away, whatever they think is most effective for them. Why does Massachusetts not like that? Massachusetts doesn't like it because Massachusetts wants people to avail themselves of the criminal justice system. If, let's just say, a woman was battered by a domestic partner and she's afraid that if she makes a complaint to the police, that ICE will be at the police station or at the courthouse, it is less likely she will call the police. Because it's less likely she'll call the police, cities like Worcester come out and say our police department will not cooperate with ICE. We want law enforcement and our court system to function. We don't want people to refuse to allow it to do its purpose because people are afraid their loved one will be taken away by ICE. So that's why we're now in an environment. I think the latest statistic was that I think it was 56% of the people who are taken by ICE have no criminal record at all. And I can tell you, and Alex can probably confirm, that many people who are taken by ICE and you see all these things that ICE says that the person was accused of and all these things that they did is the worst case explanation of what happened in that criminal event. They oftentimes report everybody like they're well on their way to becoming a mass murderer, right? When instead, maybe they lost control of themselves, were yelling and screaming, or even put a hand on somebody in a way that they shouldn't. But it was a long way away from horrible violence. But the ICE will always explain it to the general public as if there was an incident of horrible violence. And that's what you see out of this administration. So few of the people that we represent have committed crimes since they now can get a driver's license, because most crimes that anyone committed used to be driving without a license. The amount of more serious crimes are very small, and every single presidential administration, Republican and Democrat, have concentrated on removing criminals long before the current Trump administration's efforts. So there are not that many criminals, especially bad ones, that still have to be removed from the United States. They exist. But don't think under the Biden administration, if you read the Boston Globe, that there weren't plenty of stories about ICE picking up people all over the place and trumpeting about their great efforts, because they were going through great efforts in finding people and deporting them. And the people did the kind of crimes that they very often deserve to be deported from. So,
And Randy, if I could comment on this a little bit, one of the themes I think you're pointing out really well is every single decent person, in my view, this is purely my opinion, every single decent person should be outraged at the amount of authority that ICE has. But at the end of the day, they have it. Yeah. And what I think is really striking is that what ICE has the authority to do, in my personal view, is so un-American, so against the foundation. I mean, going after in manipulative tactics, the freedom to speak, the freedom to be with your family, the freedom to seek out equal protection and equal access to education, public accommodation, hospitals, to intimidate, in contradiction of everything that we have in the 14th Amendment, due process clause and all of that, equitable protection, equal protection under the law. It's so, I think that's what really strikes people. So that's a bigger question of what do we do, because those of us who have a decent view of what it is to be in America and what the foundations are and that these rights are nothing new and that they're so fundamental, that's where I think a lot of the outrage is coming from. But on a practical level, you really cannot do as much, and I would not do as much, and I'm 110,000% pro-immigrant and pro-migrant. I would not put my body between an ICE officer and an individual that they're trying to detain. I know for a fact it's against the law. Some people are making that decision to do that, and that's their prerogative. But I think it's just so interesting the way you present this, that there's a huge disconnect between the authority that's been given and the way that the government views how migrants and immigrants should be treated. And I think how the general public would, if they really knew all the facts, how the general public would feel about that. And if they understood what a violation of what the country was founded on in terms of rights, all of these actions are, and how this has really become a microcosm and a test for what other rights can be stripped by a massive agency. You know, and I don't think that's conspiracy theory. That's fact of what's happening on the ground. So I'd be interested to hear from your point of view too, maybe towards the end, of what can be done on a practical level.
okay, so let me go a little further, but just on Alex, your point, it's such a good point. What people can do is you can take out your phone and film. That's what you can do. You can't obstruct and you can't impede, but you can take out your phone and you can film. So if there's any abuse that's going on, if somebody throws some sort of a canister where, all this stuff is coming out and being hurtful to people, and there was no reason for them to throw that kind of canister, like recently happened in Chicago, you can film that. When the priest was shot in the head with one of those canisters, you film that. When ICE is taking somebody away and you think that there's some sort of abuse, you can film that. You can't impede and stop them, but you can film that. And you can help that person be identified to their loved ones about what happened, who their loved ones are, and perhaps what legal help they can get. You can definitely help with those things. All right, now, so that's the first thing, and that's the Commonwealth of Massachusetts plus some of my own stuff. All right, now the second thing is Eric Batista, city manager. He, after Eureka Street, put out something that also talked about what municipal buildings, what can happen in municipal buildings, what can't happen in municipal buildings when it concerns ICE, and what government employees that work for the city of Worcester, including but not exclusively only the police, what they can do and what they can't do when they come into contact with ICE. So the second thing that we sent around was City Manager Eric Batista, city policy implementing the executive order concerning local response protocol to immigration. So first thing he says is, as we already spoke about, Worcester Public School buildings are not considered open to the public. And then when it comes to other municipal buildings, like here, City Hall, if somebody says it's a private area, signs can be put outside to say this is a private area. And the information packet goes on to say that staff offices, staff meeting rooms, wellness personal rooms, breakout rooms, and custodial areas are non-public areas. And it says that if a municipal employee should not allow ICE into those private areas unless there is a judicial warrant, which are very seldomly issued. You remind people that administrative warrants are not judicial warrants, so don't be fooled by that if it's issued by ICE itself. He explains if there's any doubt, then you should call the law department, and he gives people contacts to be able to do that. And even records, he says, don't give out any records without a subpoena, a legal subpoena from a judge. But he also says that you should not be giving out legal advice to any resident or directing somebody not to answer a question. That's not for you to do as a municipal employee if ICE is in a public area. You should not help anybody escape or hide. And everybody says you should not make any false statements to ICE or give any false documents to ICE, because that will probably just get you in more trouble, right? So, and then the last thing from the city of Worcester, the executive order concerning local immigration protocols, the second thing that we sent around, is that municipal employees, and this includes the police, shall not inquire about immigration status, nor shall immigration status impact the treatment of a resident, victim, suspect, arrestee, 911 caller, or any other member of the public. WPD, Worcester Police, should not initiate investigations or take law enforcement action solely on the basis of immigration status, including without limitation an initiation of a stop or an apprehension or an arrest. No person will be arrested or held by WPD solely on the basis of a civil immigration detainer. So, so that's our city manager speaking to his city employees, saying what they should do and what they should not do when encountering ICE. Okay. All right. Now, the next thing I gave you was my own synopsis, which I've gone over while commenting about the state and the city synopsis about knowing your rights. But let's just see if there's anything we didn't cover. We talked about your home is your sanctuary. It's very different than a public area. No warrant from a judge. You don't have to let anybody in your home. Worcester Public Schools and other schools that are locked are also private areas. You may choose to remain silent, and that can help you in some cases. And if you have something to say that's helpful to you, that might hurt you in some cases. But you do have a right to remain silent. Federal agents can identify themselves by wearing clothes or vests and badges. They do not have to answer your questions to say who they are. You can ask ICE if you can leave, if you're being arrested or not. If they say you're not being arrested, they have a short window of time to ask you questions, and after that, they either have to arrest you or they have to let you leave. I can't be more specific on the length of time. It doesn't say, the case law does not say. But as I said, this is a hard one to stomach, as Alex said as well. It appears under the current law that U.S. citizens can be arrested or detained not only if they instruct or impede ICE, but if they fit a legal criteria that raises a reasonable suspicion or probable cause that they are not legally in the U.S. And for brown-skinned people, that must be a human tragedy to hear. My skin color, the language that I am speaking, the place that I am shopping or standing, the fact that I am who I'm with or how I am dressed, what car that I'm driving, whether I'm running or walking, those things are enough to arrest me, even if I'm a U.S. citizen, in order to find out if I'm a lawfully present in the United States or not. Are you kidding me? And so far, that's what the courts in Los Angeles have indicated, that those criteria together are enough.
Yeah, and it does seem like, well, it wasn't a full-blown endorsement. The Supreme Court has let that continue, which is really demented. I mean, it's demented. It's such a contradiction to all Supreme Court precedent from all different eras of conservative courts to liberal courts. It's a shock. I mean, it's so, maybe it's not a shock to some who know better on a practical level, but if you look at the precedent, you would never think that that would be permissible.
Right. We can only hope that the case works its way back up to the court, because they remanded it to the state court, right? And if it works its way back up in a full hearing before the Supreme Court, not on procedural matters, which is what it had before it, perhaps things will change. But as it is now, this is depressing.
Right.
Right. Okay, so now ICE's rights, just to make sure everybody knows what ICE's rights are. Under current regulations, ICE officers may initiate warrantless arrests. Like we said, they don't need any kind of warrant if they have probable cause, meaning a reason to believe a person is violating immigration laws, and that person is likely to flee before a warrant can be obtained. They have broad powers to briefly detain someone for questioning, as we discussed, and so long as they have reasonable suspicion the person is unlawful, they can take somebody in. They can hold them in ICE, and only at that point will they charge them and issue what Alex and I are so familiar with called a notice to appear, which begins somebody's removal proceeding. They can keep you for up to 48 hours before they issue that NTA. Okay, now, so that's the end of these sections of Know Your Rights. Now, I hope before you get too tired, I'm going to tell you what it's really about when you watch the evening news. I spent an inordinate amount of time breaking down immigration law so people will understand when you're not sure what's going on a national level, and the effects are right here in Worcester. This is how the changes of immigration law from the Trump administration are affecting your fellow residents. Detention. There was a case that was just decided on July 8th. The Board of Immigration Appeals said that immigration judges no longer have the authority to issue a bond or release people on their own recognizance if ICE says we don't want the person released. This is a monumental change in the law. Monumental, right? You've taken away the ability of a judge to make that decision. Now, who took it away? The Board of Immigration Appeals, as I said earlier, Alex and I, we work in the executive branch of government. The Board of Immigration Appeals is an appeals court from the immigration judges who decide cases. But unlike other independent areas of the bureaucracy and other agencies, they can be told by the administration, by the Attorney General, how the law should be decided in all of their cases across the board when an interpretation of law is going to be changed for all the judges across America. It's not independent judges like it is at the SEC or the Federal Trade Commission or a federal court or a state court. These people are not independent. These people are instructed by the Attorney General, who's instructed by their president, on changes in the law, such as you, my friend, you, my judge, you no longer have the right to release somebody from detention if that person is not a threat to the community and not likely to flee. That's not your call anymore, as of 2 months ago. That call is now made by us, the administration, by ICE. We make that call, not you, not the judge, not your honor. This is a monumental change. So what this means is, let's say there's somewhere between 11 and 14 million people who are unlawfully in the U.S. Let's say that a certain percentage of those people, let's say maybe 50%, came across the border without papers. It doesn't matter if you came 25 years ago. It doesn't matter if you have 3 children. It doesn't matter if you're an upstanding person. None of those things matter. If ICE wants to detain you because you came across the border whenever you did it, no matter what you've done with the rest of your life, if ICE wants to detain you, it can detain you. And a judge cannot let you out of detention just because you're not likely to flee. You have something you can apply for that you might win, and you're not a threat to anybody. It's not the judge's call. The administration made it their call on whether you're going to be let out. This is monumental.
Yeah, and I mean, part of that too is that many of these folks may have a pending asylum claim. I mean, they may have entered without inspection 25 years, let's say 15 years ago, and they're still in pursuit of asylum. And they could be detained and have to do that from the context of being detained with minimal access to mental health care, medical care, in access to their family, in access to their legal service provider. The person might get moved out of state, get moved across the country near the border, and then their own attorney can barely access them. So it's hugely problematic. You know, when you hear detention, I think you hear that and you may say, well, that's unfortunate, that's not a positive thing, but I think you can't overstate the impact that that has on somebody's physical, mental health status and their ability to actually access the relief that they're looking for, which was so persuasive when the judges had authority. If you went on a bond hearing, you've done them, I mean, you go to a bond hearing, you say, well, this person has an asylum claim and it's about protracted child abuse and they're currently seeing a therapist, they're out. You know, the judge is going to let them out on maybe $1,500 bond. Now they have no ability to get out.
Right.
And they're fighting from within detention.
Where there's something called cancellation and removal. You've been here more than 10 years. You have good moral character. You have a child or a wife or a parent who's a green card holder or a citizen who's going to suffer extreme and unusual hardship. You can get a green card from this. But they're going to keep you now if they want to keep you. Mm-hmm. So we can't build your case getting all the resources we can to help you, because one of our main resources is you, and you're in jail, and you may be in Louisiana by the time your family gets into contact with us. So making matters worse, the so-called one big beautiful bill gave ICE $150 to $170 billion over the next 4 years. The largest law enforcement agency, or the largest agency having to do with security of any sort, short of the Pentagon, not only in our country, but almost any other country. It is an incredible amount of money, $150 to $170 billion over 4 years. So what are they going to do with that money besides greater enforcement? They're going to up the amount of detention beds from the current roughly a little below 50,000. Now it's about 57,000 now. They're going to up it to at least 100,000 beds. Now, who are we talking about? Let's say if we use 11 million people who are not lawfully in the U.S., you're not going to believe this statistic. I couldn't believe it when I read it. 79% of that 11 million have been here more than 15 years.
Wow.
Unbelievable. 15 years, more than 15 years. And you're going to take them, detain them, jail them. Most of them probably have families. And you can apply for whatever you want to behind bars. Is that what we're really going to do? Okay. There's other things that are terrible. We used to have a law that the Trump administration has reinterpreted, and so far, apparently the courts have stood up to him at the last minute, but this was the reinterpretation of the law. For the longest time, for the 35 years that I've practiced law, if you came to the United States and you were here less than 14 days, and you were within 100 miles of a border, a land border, ICE would say, we're arresting you, we're detaining you, and we're either deporting you or you can apply for whatever you want in court. The Trump administration said, well, actually the law says within 2 years, anywhere in the country, we are able to detain you. It's not 14 days, it's 2 years. As a matter of practice, it was interpreted as 14 days, no more. And it was interpreted as within 100 miles of a border, because you're just a recent crosser, and you're the ones that we can't let come in at will, because if we let you come in at will, everyone from all over the world will come. So we're concentrating on the recent arrivals and saying, we just can't let you come in. The Trump administration says to us, recent arrivals means 2 years. And what that meant was that when people were applying for asylum or special immigrant juvenile or anything else in the court system, they're playing by the rules as that was explained to them. Go to court and apply for whatever you can. If that person was here less than 2 years, they were taken into custody. And the way they were taken into custody is they were told by the Trump administration's head of the Board of Immigration Appeals, who told their immigration judges, you can terminate this case so they're not applying for anything, especially if they don't have a fully developed asylum case. You don't have to give them a chance to fully develop their asylum case. Just terminate now if it's not fully developed. They'll have nothing they're applying for, and we can take you away. So all those pictures in New York and different cities, we had it here in Chelmsford where our court is, we had it in Boston, where people being taken away who've been here less 2 years, instructed by the judge's bosses in the Trump administration, instructing them to terminate that case, which sounds great. You're no longer in deportation, but because you're no longer in deportation, you're not applying for any relief, any way out of deportation. You have nothing going on. Come with us. So now, luckily, after doing that for a good amount of time, on August 29th, the federal court stopped 25, just recently, on August 29th, the federal court stopped the Trump administration, at least temporarily, from being able to take people less than 2 years. Now, when you take people less than 2 years, me and Alex, and now we're trying to explain to everybody, everybody knows this is not easy to get on the first time you're hearing all this, but your typical immigrant, they don't know who got taken when they went to federal court, when they went to see the immigration judge, rather, and what the circumstances were. And they don't know if they do what they're supposed to do by going to the immigration court and arguing their case, are they going to be taken too? So now people are in this terrible situation where I don't know if I should go to the immigration court because I don't know if I'm going to be taken. If I don't go to court, I'm ordered deported automatically because I didn't go to court. The judge ordered me deported because I didn't show up. If I do go to court, the government, ICE, might take me away after they terminate my case when I'm there. And I don't know not everybody knows this 2-year rule. All they know is it's now dangerous both to go to court and to not go to court. And that's the position the Trump administration has put immigrants in.
And could I give an example of that just to bring it to life? I had somebody a few months ago who had an affirmative asylum case, okay? Went to some notary in another state, and the person filled out an asylum application for this young person, did a pretty good job with it, surprisingly, just a basic application, submitted it, and then told the person, instead of saying, I'm not a lawyer and I can't actually represent you, said, don't go to the asylum office because if you go, they're going to detain you and they're going to deport you because you've been here less than 2 years. And the person just didn't go to their interview. And they dropped their pursuit of the affirmative, and they have a very good claim. It was a child laborer from a certain country who was abused in myriad ways. They just dropped it. Luckily, we were able to get that reopened. But the idea is that the chaos, I see this as they're taking the chaos from the border, where under Biden administration, Trump administration 1, Obama administration, there were always these efforts to pre-termit and block out and physically barricade people from pleading asylum at the border. And now that chaos is being brought to local streets and to local courthouses on the theory that it gives people a disincentive and a fear to go to the court and pursue their claim and pursue their defense. And then what happens if you don't go to the immigration court? You're ordered deported in absentia. So now you're with a removal order for not going, and you've foregone all of your relief. So you're absolutely right. It's a huge deterrent to accessing justice within the court.
So the Trump administration's their acting director of the Executive Office of Immigration Rule, which is the immigration courts, this is what he said. This is what they were told, what he told his judges. Cases should be pre-terminated. Alex just used that term. It means just denied before you hear the whole thing. Just stop. It's pre-terminated. It's terminated and denied if it's legally deficient without holding any hearing on an applicant's case, which would allow the applicant to explain their case in detail. Most applicants don't have lawyers, and it takes a hearing for the judge or to try to elicit why you're saying you're applying for asylum, and this gives them permission to just pre-termit that case, and not have to deal with it, and not hear it, and just take the person away and deport them. Now, the Biden administration, I'm just going to be honest, the Biden administration, not to its credit, completely lost control of the border. whereas before at the border, there used to be something called a credible fear interview, where they'd say, why are you coming to America? And if you're going to make a claim that it's for asylum, let me hear what you have to say. And if I think it's credible, I'm going to let you in, and you can go tell a judge. But if I think it's not credible, I'm going to say, I'm so sorry. I understand you want a better life for your family, for your children, but I can't let you in if you don't have a credible fear for asylum, because there's nothing else under the law that can help you. And the Biden administration, because it felt so overwhelmed on the border, stopped doing the credible fear interviews for virtually everybody, and just said, go stay with whatever relative you have, go check in with ICE, and go to court and tell it to the judge. And when that happened, a tremendous amount of people from all over the world ended up at our southern border, right? So I don't want to say that it was without fault that we're in the situation that we're in. But what they did was they hired a whole lot of immigration judges in order to hear those cases. So they created a new court in Massachusetts where our people go, Chelmsford. People from Worcester go to Chelmsford. They hired 18 new judges during the Biden administration to hear those cases. The Trump administration, thinking that these are Biden judges, so they're probably liberal, fired, or people felt forced to resign, not to be fired, 13 of the 18 judges in the Chelmsford court. So now we don't have judges. Now your case won't be heard until 2029 out of fear that the judge might help you, might hear the facts, as Alex explained, all those cases, might be sympathetic, might give you a green card. And because that could occur under a Biden judge, 13 of 18 were fired or forced to resign. And in December, another 13 were fired who were appointed between December 23 and January 24.
Randy, so effectively what you're saying also is this thwarts the whole contemporaneous requirement of making these asylum claims as well. If we're kicking them out in the process, it'd be difficult for someone to start over again.
And as Alex mentioned, you're supposed to apply for asylum within a year. Your first court date might be in 2029 if you came in 2024. So then they'll say, now there are alternatives to asylum that are like asylum. They're a little harder to win. But the inefficiency of the system for the political agenda of getting the judges you want is enormously dysfunctional. The bottom line about all of this is the immigration system is completely dysfunctional. We don't have any laws that make any sense in any way at all. And that is just part and parcel of an example of how politics makes compromise impossible, and you're either going to let everybody in or you're going to deport everybody. The Trump administration has gotten everybody so scared that it reports that 1.75 million people have self-deported. They got on a plane and they left. They're even willing to give you $1,000 if you'll go. People, 1,000, I don't want to care about the 1,000. I'm just leaving. I am so afraid to be here. And the fear is the point, right? What they're doing is to try to make people so afraid that you just won't try to exercise your rights. You will just leave. And the truth is, it's working. People are just leaving. But at what cost to this population, to these fellow Worcesterites, to fellow people who live among us every day? Good, honest, decent, wonderful, hardworking, honorable people. This is the cost. This is the fear you want them to live with, that even when they have rights, they can apply for something, they're still going to take off. So now, that app that they're using, for their self-deporting, is called CBP Home app, meaning Go Home app. It is a follow-up to an app that the Biden administration invented. That app was CBP One, and its purpose was to allow people to organize coming to the United States so that you just don't show up at the border and say, I'm here. So it expanded something called humanitarian parole. And it said for countries that are in the worst predicaments of any countries in the world, Haiti, Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua, the Ukraine after the Russian invasion, and Afghanistan after we left, you can apply for humanitarian parole. Don't show up at the border. Use this app, and we will organize you coming to the United States. We will do security checks. We will make sure you have a financial sponsor so that you don't cost the U.S. taxpayer money, and we will process you. So when that occurred, 532,000, over 500,000 people came from Haiti, Cuba, Nicaragua, and another 651,000, more than 500,000, came from Ukraine, and 133 came from Afghanistan. It gave you 2 years in the United States, and it says you can apply for something in those 2 years if something is available to you. Some people applied for asylum, and some people applied for something called temporary protected status. Now, temporary protected status is something that Joe Moakley helped invent in 1990, the congressman from Boston, that said, we don't need everyone to apply for asylum just because your country's bad. Asylum is an individualized determination that someone's looking for you. They're coming for you, not that the country's bad. But we don't want to put pressure on people when the country's so bad that you have to prove they're coming for you when they're not. It's just that nobody can live in this country right now. So they invented in 1990, and Salvadorans were the first people to get it, something called temporary protected status. So when it came to temporary protected status, there were roughly 500,000 Haitians. No, I'm sorry, that's not correct. That was 500,000 Haitians. 605,000 Venezuelans had TPS. The Trump administration has ended TPS for Venezuelans. The 605,000, over 500,000 Venezuelans who lost TPS will now be looking for any relief they can, asylum or anything, and they will be facing deportations. 330,000 Haitians had TPS. They still have TPS because of a court order that just occurred that they did not lose their TPS, even though the Trump administration tried to take it away. They haven't lost it yet. They have it till February 2026, as long as another court of appeals doesn't supersede this decision, so that they can still stay in the United States, unlike the Venezuelans who, by and large, there's a few exceptions, all lost their TPS. This is who else lost their TPS. 51,000 Hondurans, 8,000 Afghanis, 4,000. We have a lot of people from Cameroon and Worcester, 5,000 Cameroonians, 4,000 Syrians. I'm giving you general numbers. I gave you specific numbers. Those are rounding up or down. And 3,000 Nicaraguans, all in the Worcester community, all have had, the Trump administration said no more TPS for you. Now, I just want to give you one example of what TPS is and what this means for a certain group of your neighbors. People from Haiti, okay? Those people, the Trump administration on February 20th said they're going to not only not extend TPS, they're going to terminate the current TPS. And it was only a court that recently said, we're not letting you do that for now. The Trump administration said this about Haiti. The environmental situation in Haiti has improved enough that it's safe for Haitian citizens to return home. This is what other people have to say about the situation in Haiti on the ground. More than 500,000 Haitians are at risk of being deported back to a gang-ridden country that hasn't seen an election in 9 years, and where schools, hospitals, and private homes regularly go up in flames. Anyone who is deported risks returning to a place where they have no stable home and whose neighbors have been overtaken by armed criminal groups who are now in control of 90% of Port-au-Prince, the capital, and are spreading to other neighborhood areas. The UN Office of Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs says nearly half the population of Haiti faces acute hunger, and there is limited access to basic social services and education for children as more and more schools. Actually, the number is 1,600 schools have been closed. And the Trump administration thinks it's just fine to take away TPS for people from Haiti. If I can remind you, on the campaign trail, Donald Trump promised to deport Haitians as he falsely accused them of eating their neighbors' pets in Springfield, Ohio. Falsely accused them. This is the administration's treatment of Haitians and Haitian TPS. Now, further, immigration courts can no longer close a person's deportation case while you apply for TPS, as it always had before. Stephen Miller, the president's point man, says he wants to see 3,000 unlawfully present people taken into custody every day. Now, everybody always says on the right, you know, why didn't you wait online? I waited online. Just wait online. The truth is, for most people, because the immigration system is broken and dysfunctional, there is no line. Okay? But let's just say you came here, you overstayed your visa, you fell in love, you married an American, you got a green card, but you were illegal for 6 months or 20 years. You got a green card. The law forgave the illegality because you married a U.S. citizen. And now you want to naturalize and become a U.S. citizen. So everybody with their flags and all people on the political spectrum, wow, that's great, you're becoming a citizen, that's wonderful. And they're completely forgetting that person might have been illegal or unlawfully present or undocumented, whatever term you want to use, for a period of time. But the law allowed some concession. And now they're proud Americans and they're great for the country. So what the Trump administration did, said, you know, it's too easy to become a citizen. The naturalization process, it's too easy. We got to make the questions harder. Oh, yeah. And anyway, you only have to answer 6 out of 10. We're going to make it that you got to answer 12 out of 20. It's got to be harder to show you know the history of government of the United States. And as far as good moral character, if you're crime-free over the last 5 years, that's no longer the test. Now we want people to attest to your good moral character. Go get some letters or affidavits, or maybe we'll even go interview your neighbors, they said. They haven't instituted this yet, but they announced it's coming, that we might go interview your neighbors, because we want it to be harder to show good moral character than just being crime-free during the last 5 years. Denaturalization. That means we're going to take away your citizenship. Now, denaturalization has basically been reserved for people like Nazis who lied on their application for citizenship or their green card. And now we're going to go to the federal court and we're going to take away your citizenship. Trump says, why we got to do all that? The administration, we got to do all that. We need task forces in all the different field offices that are going to look at some of the cases of people who got citizenship. And if it's within 2 years, the law allows us to take away that citizenship without going to federal court. And if we need to go to federal court, maybe we have to, because citizenship shouldn't protect you 100% if we find that you did something wrong in your past, which has always been that way, but it's always been that way for the most horrendous of people. Now it's going to be expanded to a lot more people. The IRS. The IRS has always been cordoned off, walled off from enforcement, except in very special circumstances where law enforcement gets special permission to go into people's IRS records, because they believe in privacy, because they believe people won't tell the whole truth if they don't get privacy. Well, the Trump administration said, if you're guilty of a crime, if this is a criminal matter, or if you've been ordered deported, we're making the IRS give Department of Homeland Security and ICE your information. And what they haven't said is, are there any other circumstances where that might also happen? They just identified the two where it's going to be permissible for now. Birthright citizenship. The first executive order from the Trump administration said, we don't care what your interpretation has always been of the 14th Amendment since it was used to end slavery after the Civil War. We don't care that it's always been interpreted for over 100 years as giving everybody citizenship who's born in the United States. We don't think it should be that way. We don't think we have to get a constitutional amendment to change it. We don't think we need Congress to change the law. The president's going to sign it. We think I can just issue an executive order, me, the president, and I can take away birthright citizenship. That's what the Trump administration did on his first day in office. Hopefully the courts will fight back on that one. I believe they will. immigrant registration, executive order same day, requires any non-citizen who wasn't inspected when they came to the United States to register with immigration or be subject to arrest and fine for at least a misdemeanor. And anyone who's here, when you turn 14 years old, if you're not lawfully here, you got 30 days to register with the government. So if you're unlawfully present and you don't register with the government, that will now be a misdemeanor. Foreign students, 30 to 40% less foreign students are coming to the United States beginning this past September. 150,000 less foreign students. Some people estimate it so far to be 24%. They're afraid it'll get up to 30 to 40%. H-1B professional workers. The filing fee to get a professional worker, it's mostly computer scientists and doctors, researchers at hospitals and research institutions. Those people had a normal filing fee. The Trump administration says if you want a foreign professional worker on an H-1B temporary visa, that will now cost $100,000 application fee, in addition to the normal fees. First Amendment rights of freedom of expression. This is what happened to the Columbia University student and the Tufts University student, just so you know where it came from. An alien whose presence of activities in the United States, the Secretary of State, in this case Marco Rubio, has reasonable grounds to believe would have serious adverse foreign policy consequences, is deportable. So the Tufts University student, Romesa Azturk, I'm sure I got her name a little wrong, I apologize, wrote an op-ed in her college newspaper arguing for the humanity of Palestinian people. She was arrested and detained, and she was jailed for 6 weeks before she was let out. And the judge, the district court judge who let her out, said, it seems to me that she was likely detained and arrested and detained solely in retaliation for her op-ed. That's what's going on. Mahmoud Khalil, the legal permanent resident, a green card, which is much like a citizen, the legal permanent resident, Columbia University, who also advocated for a different policy towards Gaza and the Palestinian territories. He was jailed for 3 months before ICE released him. Both of those cases have not been decided. If the government has the right, which they probably do, unfortunately, to say your activities are threatening to the foreign policy of the United States, and the Secretary of State on his own can say that you are a threat and have you deported. Lastly, and I apologize for taking so much time, thank you for listening. The Alien Enemies Act of 1798 is what the Trump administration relied on. It's been used 3 times in U.S. history. The last was during World War II. Stating, aliens designated as engaging in any qualifying invasion or predatory incursion against the territory of the United States can be deported without a hearing, without due process. So, Kilmar Abrego Garcia was thought to be a member of MS-13, a predatory invasion, according to the administration. He was deported, even though an immigration judge had already said he can't be deported to El Salvador. They deported him anyway. A federal court forced them to bring him back, and now they're deporting him again. Lastly, the same Alien Enemies Act was used in court proceedings against Venezuelans suspected to be members of Tren de Aragua. Virtually nobody wants to support anything like Tren de Aragua. How do I say it, Alex?
Tren de Aragua.
Okay, thank you. Nobody wants that. But where is the proof that they are members of that? How do you deprive them of their due process? How do you not give them their day in court where they can defend whether they're a member of that organization or not? And how do you base this on the fact that you say Venezuela is at war and their drug dealing groups are in cahoots with the government, and this is akin to an enemy invasion of the United States, that Maduro from Venezuela is organizing and using Tren de Aragua instead of just a criminal gang like any other gang? So let's use a law that hasn't been used, that's been used 3 times in U.S. history against against enemies that we're at war with in order to deprive people of their due process and deport them from the United States? This is the administration. This is what's going on. And this is what's going on to your friends and your neighbors and people you care about and you love throughout this country, including in the city that we all live in. And this is the political environment that we live in. And when all that money comes from the so-called big, beautiful law, the big, beautiful bill, it's going to get worse. There has to be some sort of activity and action by everybody who cares about folks like this to try to stop this. And that's why we're having this meeting tonight. And that's why we hope that people will find a way to stand up to this. Because at some level, no matter what the abuses were of the Biden administration's open border policies, at some level, any decent person can see this as inhumane. And somebody has to stop this. Okay. All right, that's what I have. Questions? Probably everybody's tired, but if anybody has questions.
Through the chair.
Yes.
Hi. Thank you very much, Alex. Thank you for your presentation, especially presenting it in Spanish as well as English. And Randy, thank you for your presentation. I can see you put a lot of thought and effort into this. So moving forward, as we know now, U.S. citizens may be stopped, and this will disproportionately impact people of color or target different communities. Do you have anything or any agencies or phone numbers that people can reach out to, or what should U.S. citizens do when they're stopped by ICE agencies?
Well, I would think, well, this is hard, and our commission has dealt with this already, and we all know how hard anti-discrimination work is to find an ally. But I would think that besides calling private lawyers who do employment law, besides calling legal service place such as the Central Massachusetts Legal Services, and besides calling MCAD, and trying to find big lawyers who do go to federal court, who do class action lawsuits, who will represent many people throughout the United States with names of people who this has happened to try to go to federal court in Boston, eventually the appeals court in Boston, and eventually the Supreme Court, to try to stop this kind of activity. So if this happens to people, the best thing to do is to try to find, through whatever groups I just mentioned or individuals I just mentioned, people who will help get you to lawyers who do class action suits for large groups of people in the United States to make law, to change the interpretation of the law, I should have said, for the country. And that would be the goal, and those might be the access points to those kind of lawyers.
Thank you.
Okay. Questions? Anybody else? Comments, reflections?
Randy, I just want to thank you for the great presentation as well. And maybe something we can look at as a working document for a lot of the nonprofit religious in the city, just a concise document we can pass around to be able to, like, know your rights, know your laws, to support those that we are with. One thing you had mentioned that's struck me, you had made a comment about, like, the tears, and there's been a lot of tears shed in a lot of communities, especially within my own community, for those who are suffering. greatly with what's going on, and we'll never know the impact that we have just to be able to say, we see you, we stand with you, we support you, we're here for you, we care for you. And it is hard when we see our community being torn apart during this time, because it does bring about a shedding of great years. And so I think we have a responsibility as a commission to provide the best possible resources to our community as a whole.
Thank you, Father. So one of the documents, so the 3 documents that I gave you, not the political look, that's one of the documents that I ended with, but another one was a Know Your Rights presentation. So before the Attorney General of Massachusetts and before the city of Worcester came up with their Know Your Rights things, I started, as Alex I'm sure did too, started to make my own Know Your Rights thing because I had to learn the law. So I included that in there. It doesn't have like anything on it. Like it doesn't have my name, for instance. It just has a Know Your Rights presentation. But I think that's a wonderful thing, probably, to share along with the attorney generals from Massachusetts, to share with other clergy. And and Alex and I, we're sort of on the circuit of going to churches, right? Like we go together, and you go to a few, I go to a few, you don't go to, I'm sure. Go to churches all the time to talk about your Know Your Rights presentations. And sometimes it's actually more that we're talking to clergy from different communities, from the African community, Hispanic community. We're talking to clergy members. So besides that resource that I prepared. Besides that, I'm sure Alex and I can find time to go to speak to folks with you.
Another piece on that, Randy, is I find that, yes, the presentations are important. Clinics, without signing myself up to do more, I mean, I do clinics like 2 or 3 a week for the last, 9-10 months, but clinics where you can sit down with somebody one-on-one confidentially, that can be the entry point for people a lot of the time, because you can give the presentation and you're talking in the abstract. I think I've heard you say this actually. You're talking about that 0.5% chance that ICE is going to actually knock on their car window or the door of their apartment. When we hear all this, I just want to keep a little bit of perspective on enforcement, in that ICE appears in the media much bigger and more frequently in contact with the public than it actually is. And I think that we don't want to get lost in people being so extremely scared that they're afraid to pursue normal day-to-day life, while also being realistic and saying we need to prepare people to some degree for this possibility. At the same time, I think when you sit with somebody one-on-one, you're more likely, because you need to hear from them too. It's a two-way conversation, and you don't know what their biggest concerns are going to be, and they're not necessarily going to share it in terms of a presentation. So we do have a clinic at the Worcester Public Library. It's the third Wednesday of each month that can be looked at. Appointments are required. I do clinics for a lot of like social services agencies and different groups that will ask me to do them, but clinics can be a really important entry point for people to know what their options are.
It's a great point. And when I do the churches, right, if I have any say in it, like if it's not a panel and everybody is talking, what I always do is I make the presentation, then we take public questions, and then I just stay there until every single person has asked me privately whatever question they want to ask.
Definitely.
Right?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Randy, if I could comment on your presentation, I think that was just unbelievable the way you put that together, of all this onslaught, and it's so true. One piece that I want to make certain people know is that this is partly a continuation of the previous administration. Yes, it's a massive expansion, and this $170 billion, I can't even picture what that's going to look like. And my hope, as happens with many federal programs, is that they can't even spend it because of all the bureaucracy and all of the chaos that's going to occur, and where are you even going to hire these people to implement that level of funds? And that's a little bit of hope that I have. But it's overwhelming to hear point after point in these false accusations, like this Tren de Aragua situation, where you've got drone strikes on ships in the sea, and then you've got people in the U.S. being accused of being members of this terrorist organization from Venezuela. But how reliable are those allegations? And just to bring this right home to Worcester, I mean, I've represented a couple of people who were clearly, and this is under the Obama administration under the Biden administration and under the Trump administration, who were wrongly accused or falsely accused of gang membership or they call it gang associate. If they can't quite prove that the person's a gang member, they say, well, they're at a minimum, they're an associate. And it can be these factors like, well, we saw the person wearing a blue shirt. I mean, I have one where it was a blue shirt, but that was the school uniform. Okay, so these criteria that are used to make these allegations, and as you said, the agency never paints people in a light that's reasonable or favorable. The concern to me when I hear all of this is something even more global than immigrants' rights issues. This is an issue of any enemy of anybody can just have their rights stripped away. Immigrant, not immigrant, whoever you are. On a practical level, on a day-to-day level, I think there's some hope for the individuals we represent. I don't feel 100% hopeless, like, oh, everybody on my caseload is going to be denied. I think there are a lot of portions of the institution, portions of the asylum office, portions of the court, although the court, the due process issues are in question and the judges are being fired. I still think there's a path forward for many people. And I don't want to give the impression that every single person is hopeless and everybody's going to get denied, because as you said, that's being very effective. I mean, 1-point-something million people have left the country under threat of removal / voluntarily, depending how you look at it. But I think when I hear all of this, I mean, it's really a continuation of authoritarianism through the lens of immigration. I mean, immigration and immigration policy is really just being used. So it's a bigger human rights issue for this commission. And one of the things I keep hearing, everything you talk about, it's race, it's language, it's race, it's skin color. The criteria that are used for reasonable suspicion, with the Supreme Court semi-endorsing or not really objecting to the idea that some combination of language, poverty status, or employment status, and your language and your skin color and who you associate with, those are the criteria for reasonable suspicion. That's very concerning, not just for immigration, but for every type of human rights issue.
Here. So two things. One, when it comes to race, how could anybody not continue TPS for Haiti?
Right.
How do you not continue TPS for Haiti?
I mean, just
on any objective criteria of what's going on.
You
in
read
the
the country conditions reports. I would say I actively have about 60 people who are potentially pursuing either asylum or some form of relief related to their TPS, and they were trying to terminate proceedings and so forth. Out of those 60, I would say 40 to 50 of them are reporting that gang members are living in the family home right now, that the home was either lit on fire by gang members or the gang members are living in the family compound. So the idea that you could say the country conditions have ameliorated to the point that people can return is just so ludicrous.
Yeah. Further, like you said, we win cases every week, right? People get green cards every week, right? So most of those are not highly discretionary court-based cases, although we win those too, but they're becoming increasingly hard to win. But many people fall in love, get a green card, have a relative, get a green card, go for naturalization and become citizens. That goes on all the time, right? So, and lastly, your point is correct completely that it's not all terrible in this sense. When this first started, I would tell people, listen, the Trump administration has said they're looking for criminals and people who've been ordered deported. If you're not a criminal, meaning not driving without a license or a trespass, right? If you're not a criminal, right, then they're not looking for you. And if you haven't been ordered deported because you didn't go to your court hearing, they're not looking for you. Unfortunately, that went away, right? That went away pretty quick. And it became that they're kind of looking for everyone who they target. Now, who do they target? Like you're talking about the authoritarian streak. They target people that communities and cities usually that disagree with the president's policies. I'm a sanctuary city. Oh, that's good. Now I'll target you. Oh, I'm a state that says that, I'll target you. So we in Massachusetts were targeted by Tom Homan, the czar, right away in March. We were targeted again. But in general, besides those two times, there's activity in Worcester, but it's nothing like the activity in Chicago or Los Angeles or San Diego or New York. right? So it's not that you have to live all your life in fear, and you're probably a lot better off trying to just live your life and forget about it and just live your life. And a high percentage of the time, it won't affect your life and you're going to be fine. But it's a lot bigger percentage of the time, and the amount of fear that you're going to have because of what you said, what you see on television and what you heard about in court, on the street, with ICE, is going to make you so fearful. It's probably fearful beyond what the fear you actually have to feel, given the reality of the situation. All right. So, is there anything else, or should we ask for a motion to close?
We would need a motion for adjourning.
Motion for,
We would need a motion to adjourn.
okay. Anything else?
Second.
Okay, did you hear the motion? Who gave the motion?
Jacqueline.
Okay. Okay, and we heard the second.
Who seconded the motion, please?
I think it was Rose.
Father Jonathan, second.
Oh, thank you. So having a motion to adjourn the meeting, I'll take a roll call. The members present, Vice Chair Randy Feldman,
Aye.
excuse me, Clerk Carrie Witherell,
Aye.
Member Bernard Reese, Member Anahit Merudian, Member Reverend Jonathan Slavinskis,
Aye.
Member Jacqueline Yang.
Aye.
The motion carries. We are adjourned at 8:33. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Randy, and thank you, Alex. That was an excellent job, and I think if people listen to this, they're going to get a lot of information from both of you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Appreciate you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you both.
Yes, it was wonderful.
Good night.